Well, greetings from Cooperstown, New York, site of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. We're very glad you could join us for the latest edition, Virtual Voices of the Game. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in to our program on this spring day in Cooperstown. My name is Bruce Marcus, and I work in the education department here at the Baseball Hall of Fame. And today we'll have the pleasure of talking with a returning guest who last joined us 5 years ago. Hard to believe, 2020.
Yeah.
Pandemic was still going on at that time. Our guest is Kat Williams. Kat is an author, historian, also CEO of the International Women's Baseball Center. Kat's newest book, which literally just hit the shelves earlier this month, is called All the Way, The Life of Baseball Trailblazer Maybelle Blair. Kat, welcome back to the Virtual Voices of the Game studio here. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for inviting me. It's very exciting to talk about this new book. I appreciate the invitation.
Well, we certainly appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. I have to confess that whenever I do research for one of your interviews and I do Google, I put in the name Kat Williams, and there's always these stories that come up for this comedian and actor. And I know that's not you.
No, it's not. In fact, a few years ago when I would introduce myself on the first day of class when I was still teaching at Marshall, and I would say, my name's Kat Williams, and the students would snicker, and so it's tough. I am neither a black man or a comedian. So
not an actor either, right?
No.
Kat spelled, of course, with one T, but you are an authority on the subject of women in baseball, and specifically about some interesting characters from the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. We're going to get to your book, which is also, well, somewhat related to your first book, which was on Lefty Alvarez, who also played in the All-American League. Of course, this book on a completely different character, Maybelle Blair. Before we get to that, though, Kat, let's talk about the International Women's Baseball Center.
Sure.
You're involved with, you're the head of it. Tell us, what is the mission of the organization?
Well, thank you for asking. I am one of the founders of the International Women's Baseball Center, as is Maybelle Blair, among others, Shirley Berkovich, Donna Cohen, a number of other folks. Sat down in February of 2014. We had been thinking for a long time, there's a void. There are some wonderful organizations that are focused on girls and women in baseball, whether it's the history or putting girls on the field today. But there's no play. There was no place. There was no home. The Hall of Fame, that's the home, right? That is the home of mostly Major League Baseball, even though the Hall of Fame certainly recognizes women and others. Little League that's Williamsport, right? And so there's no place like that for girls and women in baseball. And so we sat around, we said, look, there's a void. And so in February of 2014, we sat down, basically we each put in about $20. And we created the International Women's Baseball Center. And it is about preserving and protecting the history and the legacy of all of girls and women in baseball, all aspects of it internationally. A lot of people think that women started playing baseball in 1943 with the All-American League and that it ended in 1954, and nothing could be further from the truth. So our goal is to preserve and protect and use that history to inspire girls today. So that is, in a nutshell, our mission.
Kat, where are your headquarters located?
We are in Rockford, Illinois, the home of the Rockford Peaches. About 2 years after we were created, some folks in Rockford reached out to us about some property that was available across the street from Beyer Stadium, the historic Beyer Stadium where the Peaches played. We own property there. We currently run and keep up Beyer Stadium, and we are launching a capital campaign to build that center. But we have been headquartered in Rockford since 2016.
Is that where you live too?
No, I do not. I live in Huntington, West Virginia.
Okay.
we have board members quite literally all over the country. We have several board members in Rockford. And now that I am full-time with the IWBC, I'm in Rockford about once a month.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
A couple of friends of ours, people that we've had on this show, Leslie Heafy and Perry Barber,
Yeah.
also involved.
Yes, they are. In fact, Leslie is the board president, and Perry Barber is the secretary of the organization, both of whom have been involved with the IWBC in some pretty important ways for quite some time.
Very nice. So you get some good people in the organization, no question
Oh,
about
yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Well, here is the new book that you have out called All the Way, The Life of Baseball Trailblazer Maybelle Blair, published by
Hmm.
Roman and Littlefield. You literally just had the book launch last Friday in Rockford. The
That's
book
right.
out brand new March of this year. So,
Right.
Kat, why this subject and why now?
Well, I have long thought that Maybelle's story was one that needed to be told. She will be the first to tell you she is not a star. She played one season with the All-Americans. Now she played professional softball, fast pitch softball as well, and a very good athlete. But when I first started asking her about this, she said, Kat, I'm not a star. I want, you need to write a book about somebody who's, stole a lot of bases or was a really top-notch pitcher. But the more, and I have, in all fairness, Maybelle is a friend.
Mhm.
She and I have been friends for almost 25 years. But the more I started to learn about her life, her story, I realized that to me, this is really the epitome of a baseball biography because it has nothing to do with her batting average, how many games she pitched. It is much more about what baseball did for her and then in turn what she was able to do to help girls and women experience baseball as well. So I felt like it was important to tell her story and talk about a baseball biography that went beyond those stats. We all love the stats, right? I'm a big Cincinnati Reds fan, and I'm here to tell you we have 5 World Series and 9 National League pennants. And unfortunately, this season, the odds of us winning the World Series are about 60 to 1. So there are some stats, some things that I do know, and I know they're important. But for me, as of about age 3, she got involved in baseball. And in the 5th grade, she convinced her teacher to create a girls' team so they could play other teams around. This was in the early 1930s in California.
Mm.
And she has been doing that ever since. And then, as advisor for the movie A League of Their Own, and then the Amazon series by the same name, she has had an impact on girls and women in sports and an impact beyond, you know, what her ERA might have been.
Yeah. So you talked to Maybelle about doing this, and she being kind of modest, maybe a little reluctant. If she had flat out said, "No, I don't want you to do this," would you
Yeah.
have said, "Okay, hands off"?
Yeah, I would have. I would have respected that. And I would have respected that of anyone, certainly who is alive and wants to. Now, I have another book that will be a couple of years in the making, and that subject is no longer with us. But if it is someone, I am always going to respect that.
Yeah,
And so I would not have done that. She eventually relented, but still, even now, when I asked her on Friday at our book launch in Rockford, so, what did you think when I asked you about writing the book? This is an exact quote. Well, I thought you were crazy, and I still do. So, she just can't wrap her head around that. But I certainly would have respected that.
she pleased with how it came out.
I think so, yeah,
Yeah,
so far. Maybelle's a businesswoman. I mean, most people think of her, rightly so, as someone connected to baseball. She's also a businesswoman. So she's calculating how many books did you sell? How many books did you
yeah.
sell? And so, but I think she is, and I think she, um, she is pleased certainly with the fact that I attempted anyway. I hope I did this, that I put her squarely in the middle of a movement to create opportunities for girls and women, because I think that really is her goal.
Is it written autobiographically, first person, or is it a
Mhm.
biographical approach?
No, it's autobiographical in places. I can't, and I put a note in the back. I wanted people to know I was present for a lot of these things that went on in Blair's life later. Certainly, the creation of the IWBC and
Yeah.
the TV show A League of Their Own. So, I have tried to be as unbiased as possible. But I want people to understand my role in her life over the last 25 years and my understanding of a lot of what happened.
We mentioned before that you earlier wrote the book about Lefty Alvarez, who has since passed away.
Yes.
This is kind of a weird question, but I'll throw it out there anyway. Was the book on Maybelle easier or more difficult to write than the Lefty Alvarez?
Wow, that is a good question, Bruce. I would say the book on Maybelle was harder. I felt a huge responsibility. Not that I didn't with Lefty, of course I did. Um, but I really believe that Maybelle's impact on girls and women in baseball is so widespread and so huge, and her story is so important that I felt nervous about doing it. I sat for hours at a time and we talked, and I listened to stories about her life and her family and playing ball and losing the love of her life. And she was in a bar raid in the 50s. And, those were golden moments. Those were cherished moments. But then when I sat behind a computer and attempted to put her words and her life on paper, it was daunting, because I felt this sense of responsibility. And again, I don't want to take anything away from the importance of the Lefty book, because I certainly felt that with Lefty as well. But I think in part because of my relationship with Maybelle, but also because she is a known figure. She
Mm.
is someone, if you are involved in any way with women and girls in baseball, you know Maybelle Blair. So that put a lot of pressure. And by training, by trade, I'm a history professor. And so one of the things, I tended to want to put a lot of footnotes in there and do a lot of research. And my publisher, my editor was wonderful, and she said, "Kat, let's get out of your academic head
Mm.
and tell this story. Tell it in a way that is accessible and in a way that people, regardless of their ability to understand theory, can sit down and actually read this book and get the story." So I was grateful for that advice, because I think that's exactly what we were able to do. And it's a small book with a big story.
Mm.
And so I think that's probably more than you wanted, but this is
No.
extremely important to me professionally, but
Yeah.
most of all personally.
I imagine you felt pressure because you are friends with Maybelle. You've been friends for
Yeah,
a number of years. And
right.
you thought, if I don't get this right, Maybelle's going to be all over me about it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And she would.
Yeah. Did she help shape the story after it was all written?
No, no,
No.
not at all. I only had a couple of sort of requirements when we sat down to do this. And one was that she would be honest with me and that I would be able to tell the story, her story, the good, the bad, the ugly.
Yeah.
And so many of your listeners may know that when the Amazon TV series came out a couple of years ago, they were invited to premiere it at Tribeca in New York. And Maybelle Blair sat on a stage at Tribeca and came out at age 95.
Mm,
That story, those struggles about her sexuality and living through that in McCarthy era of the United States, during United States history, she was terrified. But at 95,
mm,
she had the courage to stand up and do that. And no one was surprised, but the courage it took certainly meant something to a whole new group of people.
mhm,
So all of those things make up the importance of this story. And I wanted to be able to tell it. And I said, we're not hiding. We're not hiding that stuff. And she agreed. So,
mm,
other than that, there were no stipulations. There wasn't anything that she said, well, don't do this or don't do that. If there was something that I was unsure about, if it had to do with family or something, I always sort of ran that by her. But otherwise, no.
Did the people at Tribeca, which is a pretty big film festival,
Yeah.
know that she was going to do this ahead of time, or did this completely
No
catch them
one,
off guard?
no one knew it.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I don't think Maybelle knew it.
Mm,
I think she had been working, Will Graham and Abby Jacobson and a lot of the folks who worked closely with her in creating that TV series are out and
mm,
living with they're married to their partners, and this is all for most of us today that's kind of like, well, whatever. But it was a big deal for Maybelle, and so over a maybe year or two period, she got to know them and be close to them and opened up to them about a lot of the experiences that she had, and in some cases it was the first time she had done that.
yeah.
So I think it had been building in part because of their influence, not influence as in they tried to get her to do it. They were shocked. Uh, I don't know. You can find that probably on YouTube someplace, and if you
Mm,
do, be sure and check out the look on Will Graham's face. It
really?
was, I mean, people were stunned and they were crying. She got a standing ovation. Even at 95, she is trying, and that was for her. But the result was that it was opening a path for a lot of people, a lot of young people. And so, that's her greatest legacy, really.
Yeah. An inevitable question that comes out, why would she come out at 95 as opposed to maybe 10 or 15 years ago? It's certainly understandable that she didn't come out in the 70s or even in the
Yeah,
80s. It
yeah,
was a different
yeah.
time. People might not have been as acceptable or
Mm-hmm.
receptive to this. Why do
Yeah.
you think they might have been 10, 15 years ago? Why do you
Well,
think she decided at this time?
maybe they would have been. But again, she was a public figure
Yeah.
and she had an image, and those ball players have an image. And so a lot of it was wrapped up in the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, that image. They would never, ever have talked about that, right?
Mm,
None of them would have back in the day. And so they are also of that generation. Just even 10, 15, 20 years ago, things were different,
yeah.
but they are still members of a generation for whom this was scary.
Mm,
And you could get arrested. You would definitely lose your job. And so I think that's just a hard thing to shake,
right.
I think, we all grow up with certain ideas about the way things are supposed to be. And the AAGPBL is still protective of that image.
Yeah.
There are some of them not happy about her coming out.
Really.
But to me, she did it as everyone does when she could do it. She did it when it was right for her to do it and not a moment before.
Yeah. I imagine when the league was in operation from 1943 to 1954, I
Hmm.
imagine league officials told the players,
Oh,
talk about yourselves off the
mhm.
field, don't get into any romantic stuff, Don't
Yeah,
get into any preferences. Stay away from that. There may have been an order that came down for all we know, but I have to think
yeah.
something was said.
Oh yeah, and in fact there's a couple of stories in the book about when Maybelle was first recruited, and some of the women there that were a little bit older made some passes, and she was terrified. She
Yeah.
was terrified. She tells a story about when she first came to Chicago and they put her in a hotel room by herself. She pushed the dresser over in front of the door and had a whole stack of baseballs beside her bed. And if anyone tried to get in the door, she was going to throw baseballs at them.
Wow.
This was a kid that, like a lot of these women, they were, she had never been away from her mother. So it was scary. And certainly the league did not want any of that. Part of the issue, women's softball in general was extremely popular before this, and both for men and women. And when Philip Wrigley and others decided to create this league, they understood they needed to use the popularity of softball, but also that was their talent pool.
Yeah.
And so softball, women who played softball, though, had a bad reputation. They had a reputation as being manly, and so Wrigley and others made sure, and the players were told that's one of the reasons they're playing in dresses. You're going to wear makeup, you're going to be, so it was very clear, without having to be, too specific. But as Blair says, she just laughs. She's like, it
Mhm.
didn't stop anybody. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Even putting aside that issue for a moment,
yep.
talking about these were young girls in many cases, teenagers,
Yeah,
16, 17,
yeah,
18,
right,
19. I mean,
right.
they must have been scared out of their wits going into the real world, so to speak.
Yeah. Some of them, I think some of them were. A few of them, as you say, were quite young, 15, 16. Most of them were a little bit older than that. But yeah, they were terrified. And that's one of the reasons, of course, they had chaperones.
Yeah.
Um, the person that came to the house to recruit Maybelle promised the Blair family that, look, she will be looked after, and she was. And she
Yeah.
was. And so they got that, but yeah, some of them tell a story about getting on a bus at age 50 or on a train at age 15 and heading off to Chicago. But, as they would say, I think to a person, um, yeah, it might have been scary, but that was the single best time of their lives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have an early photo of Maybelle Blair.
Yeah.
It's courtesy of the
Yep.
History Museum.
Yep.
Any idea of the year of the photo? Give us some context, if you will, here.
Well, that is also the photo I used on the cover of the book. That is around 1947, and
Hmm.
that is the Chicago Cardinals. She was playing professional softball, and so that was in Chicago.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great picture. I love it.
Now, are those shorts or a skirt she's playing in?
No, those are shorts. Those are
Okay.
shorts, and for softball, that was not unusual to wear shorts.
The socks come up almost to the knees, so they provide
Yep,
some protection for the legs and sliding.
a little bit.
Yeah, a little
Yeah,
bit.
yeah,
And then it's interesting, you look at the gloves, 1947.
yep.
The gloves are still
Yep.
pretty primitive at this point.
Yeah, well, especially, I mean, maybe Major League had, folks that could afford it. Maybe they had little more high tech, but yeah, it's pretty it is pretty primitive. A number of the women that played softball initially and then moved to the All-Americans to baseball. They had a hard time switching gloves. And so
Hmm.
it wasn't like today where it's really specialized. You wouldn't dare go out on to a softball game with a baseball glove or vice versa.
Yeah.
So who knows where that glove came from?
Any idea, Kat, as to what ballpark this is in?
I really don't know. I have asked Maybelle, and she's not sure.
Yeah.
So I have been trying to do a little research, and I may be able to get some folks. Ryan Woodward, who works with the IWBC, is quite good at that kind of research. So we may turn him loose on it.
And the teams, the Cardinals, did you say Chicago Cardinals?
Yeah, Chicago. Yep.
Very interesting. So to put this
Yep.
in context, this is 1947, playing
Right.
softball. So
Right.
this is a little bit after the All-American League has started by
Correct.
4 years,
Yep.
but it's still a year or two before she ends up joining the league. I believe it was 1948, maybe it was 49. She joins the Peoria Red Wings, managed by
Right.
a great ball player, Max Carey.
Hmm.
Tell us about
Yep.
that.
Well, it was the next year, actually, from this. It was 1948.
48.
And she had been playing baseball, not, or I'm sorry, softball, not just with the Chicago team, but she had also played with some of the teams out in California. So a lot of people had seen her play. She actually knew a lot of the women who were already playing with the All-Americans, Sophie Curry, Snooky Doyle. There were a lot of her friends were already playing with the All-Americans. And so she was at practice one day with the softball team and one of the scouts from the All-Americans. And this was a practice back in California. One of the scouts, very much like the movie, came up and said, "Hey, you want to try out for the AAGPBL?" No, no, my mother's not going to go for that. And I'm not even sure, even though she knew people that played, she was kind of like, yeah, I'm not sure. That's not this established thing. And he said,
Mm,
no, let me come home with you. Let me talk to your mom and dad. All right, well, you can come, but I'm telling you, they're not going to let me out of that house. So they went. He followed her home, and sure enough, her mother was like, "No, she's not leaving this house. She's not going with you." And so he said, "Mrs. Blair, I don't think you understand. We're going to pay her $45 a month," which, by the way, was double what her father made. And
mm.
Mrs. Blair allegedly said, "George, go start the car. I'm going to pack her up, and she's on her way." And and I think she would say, as frightened as she might have been initially, she was just so grateful to have had that opportunity. And those friends are lifelong friends.
Yeah.
Many of those women have passed now, but the ones that are still around are still lifelong friends.
Hopefully, the scout that signed her was a bit friendlier than the John Lovitz character.
Yeah, right. I hope so. I hope so. Although he was a great character, wasn't he?
Oh, okay. In many ways, he steals the film, at least
He
the early
does.
part. Yeah, he's
Yeah,
great. He's
he
great in
does.
that. Who knows if
Yeah.
there was really a scout like that? May have been
Yeah, who knows?
exaggerated. I'm
Yeah, who
curious
knows?
about her manager, Max Carey.
Mm-hmm.
Great outfielder, great hitter, base stealer.
Mm-hmm.
What has Maybell told you about him? What his approach was? How he
Mm-hmm.
treated the women on the team?
Right. We haven't had a whole lot of conversation. And again, her contact with him was limited to that year. But overall, what she has said of him is that she loved him.
Mm,
He was hard, he was a coach. And she loved that. In other words, it wasn't like, oh, these are girls. We have to treat them this way or that way. He was a baseball man.
mm,
And and to a person, those women were baseball players. I'm not talking about their talent level, but they were baseball players and they wanted to be treated like baseball players. And it's my sense, anyway, that that's exactly what he did.
mm.
And again, I hesitate. I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I do think what she would say is she really respected him, and was really honored to have that opportunity.
I guess you could have seen some of these managers maybe patronize the players, coddle them
Oh
a
yeah.
bit too much,
Oh
not
yeah.
giving them enough credit. But it
Right.
sounds like Carrie didn't do any of that.
Well, that is my understanding. I have not had a conversation with any of the players who had really close relationship with him. As I said, Maybelle's connection to him and time with him was limited.
Hmm.
But that is her assessment of him. And certainly, like the Jimmy Dugan character, right? The Tom Hanks
Hmm.
character in the movie, initially, he didn't, he blew it up. Girls don't play baseball, that kind of attitude. And then eventually started to see that, yeah, women do play baseball. And so that message is reflective of the history of that league because people often said women don't. In fact, they still do say that women don't play baseball. But then they see them play and they
Hmm.
realize, oh yeah, these are athletes.
The other players on the team, generally, she liked them, got along well with them.
Yeah, it's certainly, as I said, there were a group of those women who, until they died, they were her core. Sophie Curry, Snooky Doyle,
Mm.
there were Sugar Cane, Slats. There were so many women that she both knew from the league, but also knew from playing softball. So they had gone through young adulthood. And then as they went through their lives, they became family to one another. Shirley Berkovich.
Mm.
While Blair did not know Shirley when she played, Shirley played later. They met at one of the first All-American reunions, and until the day Shirley died, March 31st, 3 years ago,
Mm.
they were inseparable. And losing Shirley was losing family. And so the bonds were just so important, and they still are. But we're talking around 600 women that played in the league. You're going to have people that get along and people that don't. And
Sure.
you're going to have people that, they were close during the league and then they got married, went away, so all of that kind of stuff. And I would say that this is probably true of all those women that those friendships, those relationships maintained well into their retirement and later years.
Kat, I would love to hear stories in particular of Sophie Kurz, who was a phenomenal player. Once,
Yeah.
at least once, stole over 200 bases in a season. She was
Yep.
sometimes called the Ty Cobb of the All-American League. She was,
Right.
a Hall of Fame caliber player in that league.
Yeah, yeah. Sophie and Blair were friends for many, many years. Blair, there are a couple of stories in the book about them getting in a bit of trouble together and frequenting some of the same bars. And so, Blair was careful. She told the stories and
Mm.
she didn't really hold back. But I get the sense that, there were some things she probably didn't want to divulge. But I suffice it to say that Sophie and Maybelle and Snooky and so many others they were they were tight, and
Yeah.
they all sort of rode the same they were on the same path, and
Yeah.
and so some of them got married, most of them did not. But there are a number of pretty funny stories. So I would encourage all your readers to read that in the book.
So, Kat, it's safe to say that after the game, she didn't go back to the hotel room at night and read the Saturday Evening Post.
Oh, Bruce, yes, she did.
She
In
did.
fact, they all did. They all went back to the hotel room and they showered and changed and they went to dinner and did all the things they were supposed to do until the lights went out.
Yeah.
It's a little like stories, from kids that are in college or,
Hmm.
their first kind of time that they get away from their families. And so yeah, they followed the rules
Yeah.
mostly. And in all seriousness, though, there were pretty strict rules about dress, about how they were to act, curfew. If they got caught, they would have been fined, which a
Yeah.
number of them were, but it wouldn't have taken much for them to just be sent home. And that was the fear. I think Maybelle was fined a few times.
Yeah.
Um, but the fear was being sent home.
My understanding is that teams, they each had a chaperone, at least one.
Yep.
Were the chaperones very strict,
I
or they kind of let things slide from time to time?
Well, I think it's hard to make a blanket statement about them over that's a number of chaperones over a 12-year period. But I from not only from Maybelle, but from Shirley Berkovich, from others that I've talked to, including Lefty, when I was interviewing Lefty, they had great respect for the chaperones.
Hmm.
In fact, one of the things that a lot of them talk about as they found to be a problem with the movie was the portrayal of the chaperone in that movie. That the chaperones were a very important part of the team, and that they really respected them and cared about them. Now, like everything else, I'm sure some of them were far more strict than others. One of them's nickname was Sarge, if that gives you any indication. So,
Hmm.
but the reality is, as you mentioned earlier, a number of these girls were young and their first time away from home. And I think that meant something to have those chaperones around.
Yeah.
So I think they were very important, but again, that didn't mean they didn't pull the wool over their eyes every now and then.
Maybelle Blair played just the one season in the league, 1948. Why
Right?
just the one year? Why didn't she come back for a second try?
Well, she actually hurt her legs, and she had really bad cramps in her legs, and they had done a number of kind of tests and stuff to figure out what was going on, and so she went home at the end of the season, and Max Carey gave her a contract, signed contract, and said, get yourself in shape and come back. And by the time she went back, she just wasn't sure what she needed to do to get in shape. But the other thing was, it's just, by the time we're 49, we're looking at 1950. And she knew she wasn't going to get married. She knew she needed to find a job. And her brother had been a longtime employee of Northrop Aircraft. And so he helped her get a job. First, it was, more like running errands, a gopher kind of thing. And then she was a driver. And then eventually she became one of the first female heads of a department for Northrop Aircraft, and that was the head of transportation.
Yeah.
So as I said earlier, she was a businesswoman. She never stopped playing ball. Even when she was with Northrop Aircraft, she created a women's softball team for Northrop Aircraft. They didn't have one, so she created it. But she felt like, I'm not going to be able to support myself by playing baseball.
Hmm.
So it was a combination of the injuries to her legs and then also just kind of an understanding that, I need to make my way in the world.
You mentioned she did continue to play softball, which she had played before the All American League. The sense I
Right.
got is that she was really a terrific softball player, maybe better at that than playing baseball.
Well, I'm not sure that I would say she was better at one over the other. I think it is for a good athlete, you can make that transition. She played
Yeah.
second base, and she had a good arm. And so when they brought her into the All-Americans, because she had a good arm, they said, "Hey, let's try you out at pitching." And she did pitch. But again, I don't think she really had an opportunity to develop that. But she was a good athlete. She was a good second baseman. And, you know, I have played catch with Maybelle within the last, say, 4 or 5 years. And in her 90s, she can hold her own. So,
Yeah. Well, sometimes you can just see with the arm motion, even though the speed's not there,
oh, yeah.
the motion indicates, yeah, this is a person. They really knew what they were
Yeah,
doing.
that's right. And I think that's the case with her.
Our guest is Cat Williams, out with a terrific new book, Maybelle Blair, Life of a Baseball Trailblazer, All the Way May. I guess, did that line from the movie, did that come from Maybelle Blair?
No, and I want to make sure I'm clear. The title of the book is All the Way, not All the Way May. And here's why.
Right.
She was given that nickname, after the movie came out. And again, if you see pictures of Maybelle, she wears sunglasses, she's got, long painted fingernails and lots of jewelry, and
Yeah.
she's flashy. And so it kind of just became a nickname. She
Yeah.
is very clear and has never once said, "Oh, that was Madonna's character was patterned after me." It was a nickname that came later. And so
Yeah.
in fact, we talked about the title, and I asked her if she felt comfortable using it the way we have it, because she never wants to misrepresent.
Yeah.
A lot of people say, "Oh, well, who was that character patterned after?" Or none of the characters in the movie were patterned after one ball player. They were
Right.
all composites of the ball players. So that's why it is a nickname that many, many people call her May. A lot of people just call her May.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to use that, but I also wanted to do it in a way that was appropriate.
I'm glad you made that point. A retroactive nickname after the fact.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, yes,
Yeah. Perhaps more reflective of Madonna than anyone else. I want to talk
probably.
more about what Maybelle did after her playing days, and you touched upon
Okay,
it a little bit. Working for Northrop Aircraft, she,
right.
according to what I've read, became the first female director of transportation for the company.
That's right.
And she actually started out as a chauffeur with Northrop.
Yeah,
So she
yeah,
really
she
worked her
did.
way up.
She really did. Quite literally starting in the mailroom. That
Hmm.
whole trajectory. First she worked part-time. And again, kind of in the mailroom sort of job, running errands, things like that. And then she did become a chauffeur. I mean, she drove around. I think she drove Ronald Reagan. It was obviously long before he was president, but so she drove generals, and so she was responsible and smart. She
Mm,
clearly has good leadership skills, and eventually she was asked if she would be interested in moving to the transportation department, which she did.
mm,
And then pretty soon after that, they talked to her about taking over as director. And she said, "The only way I will do that is if I learn to drive every single vehicle in this pool." And she did, all
mm.
of them, 18 wheelers, all of them.
Wow.
And she said, "There's no way I can hire these guys and expect them to do something if I don't know about it or understand it." Um, One of the biggest things, though, was planning the movement of planes from Northrop to an Air Force base, right? So back
Mm.
then, in some cases, took the wings off, and they escorted them through the streets of LA to get them to where they needed to be.
Wow.
And she was in charge of that. And so it was a huge job, and she loved it. I mean, she really loved it, and basically retired because she also injured her back. She fell from a horse,
Mm.
and so she was suffering a little bit. She was ready to retire, kind of. And so she ultimately retired, but not because she didn't love the job. She did love the job, and she was very thankful to Northrop.
Let's fast forward to the early 1990s, preparations for the film A League of Their Own, part of which
Hmm.
was filmed here in Cooperstown. Some
Right?
scenes in the Hall of Fame, some scenes down the road at Doubleday Field. When she was
Hmm.
approached to do this job, to be an advisor, what was her initial reaction? Was she really thrilled, or was she a little bit nervous?
No, she jumped at the chance. And in fact, as I understand it, one of the things that happened was that one of the former ball players, Karen Kunkel, was approached by Penny Marshall and to act as a kind of a go-between with the Players Association and advisor. And so Karen sent out, I don't know if it was an email then, probably a letter, to the players to say, they're going to have tryouts. They want to see if any of the ball players can, play some minor roles or whatever. So she answered that call right away.
Hmm.
And so it wasn't that they necessarily sought her out. But as Blair says, that tryout was fun, but Penny quickly realized that none of the ball players could act and none of the actors could play ball. So, and she says that with a laugh. Actually, Meg Cavanaugh, who plays Marla Hooch, is quite a ball player.
Yes.
But so what happened then? That kind of shifted, and they used, as you know, that last scene of the movie filmed at Doubleday. They used a lot of the former players in that scene, and also the scene where they opened the women's baseball exhibit.
Is
She
Maybelle in that
was
scene?
thrilled. She is, yes, but you wouldn't really necessarily recognize her. And her glove and hand is in the scene where the game's being played.
Yeah.
But she was part of that, but not she didn't have a speaking part or anything like that.
It's hard to believe it's been 33 years that
Isn't
that
that
happened.
crazy?
I was
Isn't that
working at a
crazy?
radio station in Utica, New York,
Yeah.
and I still kick myself to this day because I remember a friend of mine, Joe
Yeah.
Kelly, works in the Utica market, was at the newspaper there for many years. He's had a local television show, and he actually got to be an extra. He played a reporter of
Oh,
all things in
fun.
the film.
Yeah,
And I
that's
look back
great.
at it and I said, why didn't I make that trip? It's less than an
Yeah.
hour
Yeah.
just to hang out and see the filming. And I guess
I know.
I didn't know how good it was going to
Yeah.
be. I didn't know
Yeah.
how significant the topic was. I knew a little bit about the All American League,
Right.
but if I knew then what I knew now, I would have made the
Yeah.
trek, and I
Oh
didn't.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I know. Hindsight, it's
right.
always 2020. Yep. Yep.
What did Maybelle think of the final product of the film? I love it. It's my favorite baseball film. I imagine you
Yep.
love it too. Did
I
she
do.
have similar thoughts?
Yes, she loves it. And I think I have never talked to one of the former ball players that did not love the movie. They do have a few things that bother them. As I mentioned before, one is the portrayal of the chaperone that bothered a few of them.
Mhm.
But the one that comes up more often than not is there would have never been a man in the locker room. When Tom Hanks comes into the locker room and he goes off to the urinal, that would never have happened. And so, there's that kind of stuff, but Maybell has consistently said it was pretty accurate and she loved it. I think all the players loved it. And I think that, as I say, they're going to be kind of nitpicky things, but it was a Hollywood movie. It wasn't a
Yeah.
documentary. But I do think it was important for all of them to um, see themselves and see themselves in a celebratory way. And I think almost if it had been the worst movie on the planet, it would have been important to them
Yeah.
from that standpoint. But I think they do love it. And I will say it is the highest grossing baseball movie in history.
Wow.
Think about the baseball movies we're talking about. Field of
Yeah.
Dreams. It is, and I'm telling you, 10-year-old girls today will come up to Maybelle Blair and thank her. They know the lines from that movie. And we have to ask ourselves why. Is it because it was great cinema? Well, maybe, but maybe it's about the fact that it touches something in all of us for girls and women from every generation who
Hmm.
simply struggle to take the field. And it holds a special place, certainly in my heart.
Yeah.
And I think that's true for a lot of people.
We think of the 1980s as the greatest era for baseball films. You had The Natural with Robert Redford. You
Right,
had Field of Dreams, which you mentioned, which a lot of
right,
people love, James Earl Jones, Kevin Costner.
right.
You
Mm-hmm.
had Bull Durham.
Mm-hmm.
There was actually a movie that was an HBO film starring William Peterson. I forget what it's called. It doesn't get a lot of publicity, but it's an excellent film as well, made for TV, made for cable.
Mm-hmm.
Outstanding film. William Peterson's the guy who went on to do the CSI TV series.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
Um, Long Gone was the name of that movie.
Oh, right.
And
Yeah.
I don't think it was in theaters, but it was on HBO. You never see it now, but it's terrific. So
Yeah.
you have all these great films from the 1980s, and then early 1990s, 1992, A League of Their Own comes out, and you could make an argument that A League of Their Own surpassed each one of those,
Yep.
as good as they were.
Well, as I said, it certainly surpassed them in terms of money.
Yeah.
Um, but you know, a lot of people would argue, and I have had this conversation with a lot of people. There is no better baseball film than Field of Dreams. And I said, you know what? I love that movie. I
Mm,
absolutely love it. I choked up just like everyone else. But you know what? I didn't see myself in that movie. I
mm,
didn't see any other girl in that movie. I saw the age-old trope of dads and sons playing baseball. That's great. That's
yeah.
great. More power to them. But you know what? 50% of the population is female. And it is absolutely true that women and girls love the game of baseball too, and we have grown up playing it. So for me, and again, it's a personal perspective. I'm not saying it's a
Mhm.
bad movie, but I didn't see myself in that movie.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's so huge. Is there another movie out there that shows girls and women playing the game and how important it was? Maybe a few minor ones, but of the ones that you just named, they're all about men.
Yeah.
And so there are more stories out there made about, and again, that age-old fathers and sons playing ball, let's have a catch, whatever.
Hmm.
And yet, while there are a few minor ones, there's only one for
Right.
us. And I think that accounts for some of its popularity. It's also a really good movie. It's fun, it's funny, it's sad, it's all of those things. But there is not a person I've ever known who loves the game, plays the game, wants to play the game, that doesn't absolutely latch on to that movie, latch
Mm.
on to the lines of it, and say, wow, that changed my life. It
Yeah.
changed mine. It changed mine. I remember the day very clearly when I sat in a theater and watched it. It
Mm.
absolutely changed my life.
Wow. Last question on A League of Their Own. Did Maybelle get to know Penny Marshall pretty well?
Oh, yes, they were quite close. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Maybelle is still close with Tracy Reiner, Penny's daughter.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Who played Betty Spaghetti,
Yes, she
center
did.
fielder,
Yes,
right?
she did.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And Tracy is fabulous. She has been a big supporter of women's baseball in her own right,
Yeah.
aside from her mom and the movie.
I want to ask about the TV series, also called A League of Their Own. It came out a couple
Yeah,
of years ago. It was
right.
featured, I believe, on Amazon Prime.
That's right.
Bell Blair also worked as an advisor on that, and you said you did a little bit of advising. Talk about that.
Yeah, my world, I do not want to play this up. My role was very minor as a historian and a historian of women's sports. There were, for example, the Cuban ball players, because of my book about Lefty Alvarez and some of that research. There were some historical things that I could provide for them, and I did that. But it
Mm,
was again a minor role. I am very proud of it, don't get me wrong, but I also don't want to overstate it. Maybelle was a prime advisor. She and Shirley Berkovich were both advisors from the time when they were just sitting around in a room talking about doing this. Eventually, the TV series, and if you guys haven't seen it, I would encourage you to watch it. It is not a remake of the movie. It was never meant to be a remake of the movie. It is looking at that story of the Rockford Peaches in 1943, but doing a deeper dive into the issues that Penny Marshall could not have done in 1992, looking at race and sexuality and ethnicity and in ways that in 1992 that's just not going to make its way into a movie.
Mm.
But the Amazon series, a lot of the stories, or many of the stories from that are highlighted in that season, are Maybelle Blair's. There is believe it's episode 6, where there is a bar raid. And I am here to tell you is one of the best hours of television I've ever seen in my life.
Mm.
And that story comes right out of the mouth of Maybelle Blair. And so she had a huge role in it. And beyond that, she became very close with Will Graham and Darcy Carden and Abby Jacobson and so many of the others involved in that show. She is, I think, as proud of that as anything.
I didn't see the series, although I do have Amazon. I'm going to have to make a point of watching it this spring.
Yes, do. Yeah,
It was canceled after only 1 year. A
that's
lot of
right.
people were upset about that. Why do you think they shuttled it?
Well, the explanation that was given was, of course, budgetary reasons. And I don't know anything about the TV business, but I am nothing if not skeptical. And I believe it was likely to do with the subject matter. There was a lot of, as I said, there was some real open, frank discussions about sexuality and also about race. And I thought it was brilliantly done and long overdue, because if people think they know the story or the history of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, but they don't know that part of it, they don't really know that history. They know this sort of superficial, what people kind of whitewashed,
Yeah.
literally and figuratively. And so I think it was really it likely had to do with that. But again, I don't base that on anything conversation I've had.
One other topic I want to touch upon before we close things out. You mentioned earlier that Maybelle, along with yourself, helped found the nonprofit International Women's Baseball Center. Is
Right.
it part of your mission? Is it part of Maybelle's mission to see a professional league for women players? Is that one of the objectives?
Well, that is not an official mission of the IWBC, but it is the preservation of women's baseball history and legacy, but also to help create opportunities moving forward. So
Mm.
in that sense, yes, we are big supporters of the new Women's Pro Baseball League. In fact, Maybelle is a primary advisor, and I am also on the advisory board of that new league. So while it is not necessarily a stated part of our mission, it is very much something we would like to see.
I saw you do another interview, I think it was earlier this month. You said there's a possibility of a league starting up next year, correct?
Yes, that's the women's professional or the Women's Pro Baseball League. There are Justine Siegel, who many of your listeners probably know,
Sure, sure.
founder of Baseball for All. She is part of that, as is Keith Stein. And so they are creating a league. It's made some big press. The idea is that they will start playing in 2026. And so it's moving forward. The announcement made some big news around the country. And so as I said, Maybelle is an advisor for that new league, and I
Mm.
am on the advisory board. And so this is a big deal, and we're very excited about it, and willing to do what we need to do to help make it happen.
Very good. Looking forward to that. I
Yep.
want to finish up with just a couple of quick reviews of your book, which are very favorable. One comes from Jean Fruth, co-founder of Grassroots Baseball. She writes, Cat Williams' beautiful writing pays homage to Maybelle while continuing to shine a light on women's sports history. And then from Abby Jacobson, writer, director, producer, and actor. She writes, finally, a book about the incredible Maybelle Blair. Everyone should get the chance to know Maybelle, and I'm so happy Cat Williams shares Maybelle's inspiring story in this beautiful book, one we could all take a page from. The book is available, as you can see on the screen, at Amazon.com. You can also go to the website for the publisher, which is Roman Littlefield. And is there any way for people to get signed copies? Are you going to be doing any autograph shows or?
I I will be in Louisville, Kentucky on April 1st at Carmichael's bookstore. I just did one in Rockford. I've got a couple of others lined up, but we haven't solidified those yet. And I can also, people can reach out to me, and I can try to do it. Maybelle lives in California and I live in West Virginia, and so it's hard to get both of us to sign the book. But if folks need that, they can certainly reach out to me, and I can try to work that out.
So April 1st in Louisville, but hopefully more to come in
More to
terms
come.
of book signings. Well, Kat,
That's
this
right.
has been fantastic. I've learned
Thank
a
you,
lot about the
Bruce.
story of Maybelle Blair, about the
Yep.
league. I'm
Yep.
thrilled to hear about this possibility of a new women's league. I've been calling for it for years, and it looks like it's
Yes.
finally happened.
I hope so. I hope so. And thank
Yeah.
you so much for this. I appreciate it, and I certainly appreciate all the support the Hall of Fame has given me over the years.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is one of just two books that Kat has done on the subject of AAGPBL players. The earlier one, Isabel Lefty Alvarez, that came out in 2020. And I understand that you do have a new book coming out on a non-league player.
That's right.
Talk
That's
about that
right.
at all?
Well, all I can say is it will be the first book besides a children's book that has been written about Edith Houghton.
And she played for the Philadelphia Bobbies, right?
She played for the Philadelphia Bobbies,
Yeah.
among other things, and was in Japan with the Bobbies and became the first female scout for the Phillies. So
Yes.
Edith's story is quite interesting. It'll be a while before that one's out, but that's next on the
Yeah.
list.
Well, promote the Blair book first. Take some time
I'll
off
do it.
and start writing.
Yeah.
That's
I'll
been a
do it.
blast.
Thank
Thanks a
you.
lot, Kat Williams. We really appreciate
Thank
it.
you. I appreciate it. Thanks again.
Our guest is the standout author and historian Kat Williams, talking about her new book on Maybelle Blair. We thank Kat for her contributions over this past hour. We thank all of you for listening as well. And we hope you continue to join us for future virtual programs from the Baseball Hall of Fame. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Have a great day, everybody. Take care.